Okay. All right, item number 20, in accordance with Texas Government Code 551, we reconvene in public session.
No action to take as a result of closed session.
Right. We don't have to vote on that, correct? Okay. Item 21, discuss any matters for future agenda.
Like to discuss possibly, one of us mentioned a term that was corrected by Chris, which was I think he called it restore in place as opposed to replace in place. I would like us to consider a fourth option of restoring in place.
What's the difference between replace and restore?
Restoring is using a good part of the infrastructure, and by doing that, we might actually avoid this
Would we retain our grandfather?
So,
yeah,
that's.
If we put on anyway.
So Steve, I
Folks
think
don't
what,
realize that.
yeah, I
They keep
think,
pushing it, but yeah, a lot of things, once you start playing around with different apparatus of the plant, it ungrandfathers you from
Yeah.
a whole lot.
so,
Even for something considered repair.
well, so what?
Now, if you're just replacing pumps and stuff, it's not a big deal, but if you have walls that are nearing falling down.
Things like that, big things like tanks. If you start redoing a tank, or
So this came up some at the trustee meeting about, if you start to touch one thing, then you have the grandfather issue. And so what I mentioned, suggested at the trustee meeting, and we'll talk about some more, as we go forward, is to the extent that the River Authority does this, option 3 about replace in place, there needs to be justification, footnotes, what have you, that reference the particular code provisions that require a replacement of a related piece of infrastructure because you touched another piece of infrastructure. And I think, and this gets beyond my technical expertise, of course, but the theory, I think that what the River Authority was saying, that you couldn't just do specific components to try to extend out for 20 years.
Wouldn't this be something we ought to maybe query the TCEQ on? To see if 217, what would it take to basically to make the 217 rule an issue we wouldn't be able to comply with?
Well, I think there's a lot of variables in that, what we're talking about. So, I mean, it's.
Well, I think what you
Well,
just said,
what can you replace?
what you just said is the answer. I mean, they need to go in and identify which specific piece would trigger other rules or other areas of that rule. And I think if they do that, that'll be the answer.
Well, wouldn't that-
Aren't we getting the horse before the cart there? I mean, shouldn't we let them do their study and then start questioning? I mean, we're starting to question, before they even complete their review of what they're going to be doing now.
this might be the time. I mean,
This is the time.
Yeah, it'd be
Before it goes too far.
before they start spending money on a review like that. If we, I mean, who would we have to ask to find what repairs we could make? And
I don't think
not,
there's a rule in place.
okay,
So the engineers have to follow that rule.
okay,
So what he just said was, if they go in and identify, following the rules, what would need to be changed, they can document within the rule, which provision of those rules would dictate whatever move is next on each piece.
And a good example of that is a commercial establishment is going to remodel their facility. They have to update it, such as putting in fire, what do you call those things?
Do electrical.
Well, yeah, you have to update to the current code level. So if it was old and met code years ago, but doesn't meet today's code, you'd have to update it to that code. So that's similar what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, this is gonna be, further discussed. I get what you're saying about, can you just do a few component pieces and be able to stretch out the life?
No, not just a few. I'm actually a lot.
Yeah,
But at what point does chapter 217 say, no, this is new, you're not grandfathered anymore?
and that's what I think was talked about at the trustee meeting last week, was to the extent there's anything that the river authority is proposing to replace that isn't one of these critical pieces that needs to be, there needs to be documentation of a reference to a code rule or regulatory requirement that justifies the need to replace that other component that otherwise would not have been placed because of this lack of a grandfather option.
Yeah, 217 rules aren't subjective. So if you read the rule, you have to follow it. So it'll tell the engineers exactly what they need to do. They go in and want to just kind of piecemeal things.
Right.
Okay, just from my understanding, is replaced in place essentially just rebuilding the plant? A totally new plant on the location that we already have waste treatment plant number 1. Is that what they mean by replace in place?
That's what I understood him to say, because he followed up with, then we wouldn't need the additional land. So that I assumed that. wouldn't
Plan,
need-
but I mean, essentially we're rebuilding the plant while the current one's in operation.
That was my understanding.
But what I got confused with at the trustee meeting, they were talking about, well, we got clarifiers, but they're too shallow, apparently. So how do you replace something that's too shallow? And I asked, well, can you just make it deeper? And they said, no, that's not really the solution to that. So he said they're actually, the clarifiers would actually be larger diameter as well. That was Ed.
Yeah, possibly. They may not be. There could be more of them. They could be deeper. Just depends on what size they need to be in order to meet 217.
Didn't he even talk about up to 6 clarifiers?
I think that was just off the cuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, the engineers would need to figure out what size and how many of.
That wouldn't exactly be replace in place. 6 clarifiers.
Well, it would, in that case, it would be, because once you start messing with that clarifier, you have to meet code. So if you don't have enough capacity in the existing ones, you might have to build another. Or the 3 you have, you might need to build 3 new ones that are bigger or deeper.
But you would
different
need
ways to
extra
skin it.
land, right?
I mean,
Yeah.
Chris said no.
Oh,
There's certainly the general difference, I'll just say, from the old criteria to the new criteria often creates the necessity of the new rule creates larger basins. It's not a general rule, that's usually what happens. Yes, you can go deeper, but it's also it's a flow and gravity situation. So they've got to be able to make that plant. If it's a conventional plant, the front has to be higher than the bottom. No matter where that is around the whole, think about how as you walk through that plant, everything generally needs to gravity flow down to the next process unit, right? So you don't have to pump everything. And so they would have to figure out how to do that while creating enough capacity in order for that particular, whether it's clarifier or aeration basin or chlorine contact basin, whatever the case may be, they're going to have to make sure that one, it has enough capacity to meet the 217 rules whenever they deal with it. So if they're dealing with, let's just say, one piece of it, clarifier, for instance, they're going to need to go in and say, okay, for this size plant, how much clarifier do we need? Now you can skin that different ways. So it oftentimes, very often, is that you would have enough clarifier to meet your needs. You might build another one so that when you have to take one down later, you're still able to operate. So you don't max out the capacity of the 3 you have, but maybe you build one that has some excess capacity so that you can take things offline.
well, it seems like that's what we can do, because even the clarifiers are 2.6 million gallons a day. And we're functioning basically, I think last month it was 3.6. Well, with 2 of the 2.6, we got 5.2 going. So we can actually function and work on one, put one down and work on it. And then, once that's up and running and tested and providing service, then we can shut down the next one and kind of do all three in sequence. If we stick with with the limitation of basically 5.2 million gallons or less. Does that make sense?
Not really.
Oh,
Change the clarifiers, everything downstream is
So that, I think the engineers should enforced by the,
clarifier or
I don't know the particulars, and so that's why I said to the extent that there's anything additional that would be replaced that wasn't, deemed necessary because of the condition of the facility, they need to have references to the particular rules that mandated the replacement of that other component. Because I think I think there's certainly a recognition that the directors want to find the lowest cost, highest, highest result outcome, and whatever that is. And so, yeah, if there's a piece that is in fine condition, why would you replace that? Well, if the River Authority proposes for some piece that's fine, and I don't know what that piece would be to be replaced, they need to have a justification for that. And that needs to be a reference to a particular regulation. If you touch this, that does need to be replaced, then you're required to replace that. And so any director can follow the chain and the justification to ensure that things aren't being replaced that have useful life left in them. I think that's the concern.
Aren't we getting into a discussion it's not on the agenda?
Yeah.
If we
this
wanna
one
put it on the
goes back to
agenda.
It goes back to item 11, really. So, but yeah.
But everything downstream of the initial improvement is still held to code, right? If you're forced to replace item A to, get it up to function, item B downstream has to be upsized for whatever reason, you still have to follow code on B, right?
it's not that directionally related.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's possible, but it doesn't mandate that that it's
I understand.
exactly in line. No. Because each specific process unit has its own design criteria. So for instance, one of the big things that changed years ago was in the 217 rules from the old rules was chlorine contact basin contact time, for instance. And so all these old chlorine contact basins, so chlorine contact, if you recall looking at the chlorine contact basin, it was a maze, right? It went back and forth. The reason for that is that's forcing the contact time of the chlorine to the contaminants on its last run out of the plant. Well, that calculation changed in 2017 to where you needed longer chlorine contact time, which created folks having to go in and build a bigger tank or do something to create more chlorine contact time, which usually was making those runs longer or making it, whatever the case. There's different ways to do it. So that may not be related to the aeration basin, which is 2 or 3, process units upstream. So it just kind of depends on what it is and how it works together.
do you know if they're looking at UV?
They were, the MBR had UV in it for sure. Yeah.
Good.
That was my understanding. I don't know about the other options. A valid question you might want to ask, that some of this I think is semantics, but a valid question that you might ask is, well, when you go in to do a replace in place, not getting hung up on the words replace, just saying, are there units or parts of the existing facility that can be used, that do have sufficient life? And in your look of doing the replace in place, can you look at what could be utilized instead of just tearing the whole thing down? And the answer may be none. The answer may be, yeah, maybe there are. I don't know. I mean, you have the, remember the building in the back left is the sludge processing building, right? That's fairly new. That may still be able to be used. I don't know.
They'll address this in the
Well, I think that's maybe
That's
some
option
questions. that you
three.
might wanna-
That's what should be addressed
Correct.
in option three.
Okay.
Anything else on item 21? All right, item 22, I have a motion and a second to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you very much, everybody.